Before we get into this, if you care about serious history, real survival knowledge, and lessons worth carrying forward, subscribe to The Prepper Historian, and share this with someone who still thinks wartime survival was just about ration books. This channel exists for people who want depth, accuracy, and hard-earned insight, not recycled trivia. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth most documentaries glide past. While frontline soldiers often survived on starvation rations, families at home who understood food security quietly stayed alive. Not because they were selfish, but because they were smart. They didn't just follow rules, they read between them. And the foods they hid weren't luxuries. They were strategic assets. What you're about to hear isn't romanticized nostalgia. These were deliberate decisions made by people who understood that systems fail faster than bodies do. Why hidden food mattered more than official rations in wartime homes. Rationing was designed for fairness, not survival optimization. Governments calculated calories on paper, assuming uninterrupted distribution and obedience. Families living through bombings, supply disruptions, blackouts, and sudden evacuations knew better. When trains stopped or shops were stripped bare, the only food that mattered was what was already inside your walls. Families who survived longest weren't those with more ration cards, but those who stored foods that were invisible, durable, calorie-dense, and usable without fuel. That mindset is as relevant now as it was in 1942. Why whole grains quietly kept families alive when bread disappeared. Bread was rationed, monitored, and highly visible. Flour purchases raised eyebrows. Whole grains, however, especially wheat berries, oats and barley, were often overlooked. They didn't spoil quickly, weren't immediately edible, and didn't attract attention. Families hid them in sacks labelled as animal feed or stored them in false-bottom bins. The advantage was control. Grain could be ground slowly, stretched into porridge, mixed with other fillers, or saved entirely. A household with grain wasn't dependent on daily bakery access. Today, the same principle applies. Store whole grains instead of flour. Learn basic hand-grinding methods. Practice cooking them with minimal water and fuel. This isn't nostalgia, it's redundancy. Why animal fats were guarded more closely than sugar or meat. Sugar disappeared fast. Meat was regulated heavily. Animal fats, especially lard and tallow, were survival gold. They provided calories, cooking medium, and even candle fuel. Families rendered fat themselves and hid it in ceramic crocks or sealed jars, often buried or kept behind false walls. Soldiers rarely received sufficient fat in rations, which contributed to rapid weight loss and fatigue. Civilians who retained fat could cook, fry, and fortify bland foods. Modern takeaway fat is energy. Store shelf-stable fats like ghee or learn rendering basics. In any crisis, fat determines whether carbohydrates sustain you or merely delay collapse. Why dried legumes replaced meat without drawing attention. Beans, lentils, and peas weren't glamorous. That was their advantage. They weren't heavily rationed early in the war and were often dismissed as poor man's food. Families who stockpiled them quietly replaced meat protein without attracting scrutiny. Preparation mattered. Beans soaked overnight required less fuel to cook, something soldiers couldn't afford in the field. Families pre-soaked, slow-cooked or mashed legumes into stews that could feed many mouths. Today's application is straightforward. Store dried legumes, practice fuel-efficient cooking, and understand complementary proteins. Survival isn't about abundance, it's about balance. Why root vegetables became hidden insurance policies. Potatoes, turnips, carrots and beets were often grown, hidden or stored in cellars, basements or improvised pits. Root vegetables survived cold, needed no refrigeration and could be harvested quietly. Families hid surplus underground to avoid confiscation or theft. These foods were filling, versatile and renewable. A single potato could be replanted. Soldiers had no such luxury. Modern parallel, learn low-tech storage. Root cellaring still works. Even in urban settings, insulated containers and cool spaces extend food life dramatically. Why shelf-stable milk substitutes save children and elders? Fresh milk was scarce and prioritized for institutions. Families hid powdered milk, condensed milk or dried cheese when possible. These weren't comforts. They were nutritional safeguards for children, the sick and the elderly. Calcium, fat and protein mattered when diets narrowed dangerously. Soldiers often went without. Today, powdered dairy or shelf-stable alternatives remain overlooked yet critical. Learn how to rotate and use them before you need them. What this teaches modern survivalists and historians alike. The lesson isn't hoarding, it's foresight. WWII families understood that visibility invited loss. They stored foods that didn't scream value, learned how to use them efficiently, and spread risk across multiple food types. Apply this now by diversifying storage, learning preparation methods that reduce fuel use, and prioritizing foods that last without infrastructure. Practice eating what you store. Knowledge without rehearsal fails under pressure. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes brutally well. If this kind of deep, practical history matters to you, subscribe to The Prepper Historian, share this with someone who thinks preparedness is paranoia, and keep learning. Survival has always belonged to those who prepared quietly.